Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English 2105, English literature from its earliest beginnings to 1700. This is lecture 4, where we'll be discussing Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the General Prologue. But first, some housekeeping. Just want to make sure everyone's aware that tomorrow you'll be required to post your first discussion post. So several of you have already done this. Reminder for those who haven't to do so, not too taxing, 50 to 100 words, your impressions of the works we've read so far. Any questions, comments? Again, you can indicate a question mark in the chat to me that you have a question or comment. Let me know about the logistics, about what's expected of your assignment coming up. Okay, no questions. So I'm going to proceed with the lecture. We're going to discuss, as I said, the General Prologue of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Maybe you could let me know, again, a show of hands. Has everyone had a chance to read this? Show of hands if you've read the reading for today. So not many of you. Okay, so this will be news to some of you. And hopefully when you get a chance to read this, hopefully we have a better comprehension of this because of the interlinear translation. So we'll be looking at the modern English translation, but we also have the Middle English before us. So today's lecture will start with a discussion of Chaucer's life and works, including a bit of the background of Chaucer in terms of his social context, as well as his linguistic context. We'll talk a little bit more, that is, about the nature of Middle English in relation to Old English and Modern English. We started that discussion on Tuesday with our discussion of the backgrounds of Middle English literature, but we'll flesh that out a bit more today. We'll talk about the Canterbury Tales, how it works generally speaking in terms of its structure, as well as the overriding theme there of life as a pilgrimage. So life, existence itself is a pilgrimage to our true home. We saw that already at play in Chaucer's short poem, Truth, when we discussed that on Tuesday. Then we'll get right into the General Prologue, namely focusing on that as an estate's satire, as we'll see. It's a reminder of where we are in terms of the literary periods covered in this course, in that Middle English period, towards the late medieval period of literature and culture. Chaucer's life and works. So he lived at the latter half of the 14th century, from a wealthy merchant family. Studied extensively, studied law among other things, but studied law before pursuing a military career and eventually a long career in the public service. He participated in a number of ways in the 100 Years' War. He was actually captured and ransomed during his military service, and then during his public service, he took on a number of diplomatic roles. And as I indicate there, a later poet from the Restoration period, so the latter half of the 17th century, John Dryden. John Dryden calls him the father of English poetry. So a monumental figure in the English canon. So he wrote a great deal of poetry throughout his adult life, for amusement, for pleasure, but also as a way of making money as part of this patronage system, which existed until relatively recently, where artists would have their works commissioned by a wealthy patron, a noble person, so that this work could become part of their private collection. We'll go over now some of the basic categories of the works. So when it comes to his works, there are these dream visions. Does anybody remember raising their hands where we've seen dream visions before? So we've already read a dream vision in the few works that we've studied already. Yes, so Riley, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Riley Young says, Dream of the Rood. And no, you're not butchering the name. Yeah, he says, yes, you've got it. Yes, so Riley's point is right on. Dream of the Rood was a dream vision. And so it's a type of frame narrative we'll see. So these dream visions, like the Dream of the Rood, were start with the dreamer, the narrator, telling about how he or she once dreamed some fanciful tale, and then the actual tale becomes this the dream that's recounted. And we have the Book of the Duchess, Parliament of Fowls. So this is Parliament of Fowls is kind of a let's say a satire of political governance, where the parliament are different types of birds, in the tradition of Aristophanes almost there. So he's got a famous comedy called The Birds. House of Fame, or Hus of Fama, it's one of his more famous other minor works, The Legend of Good Women. Troilus and Cressida, his other major work, is an example of the type of courtly poetry that he wrote during his career. It's a sad love tale between these two legendary figures set during the Trojan War. They're Trojans. Cressida is captured by the Greeks. Troilus then suspects her fidelity, overhears what he thinks to be a discussion with her new Greek lover, renounces this world, and it ends in this with this tragic separation of the lovers. A frame narrative proper in Canterbury Tales is the one example there. Short lyrics such as the short lyric Truth, which we read. He also wrote translations of other texts from Latin and French. So the Consolations of Philosophy, we talked a bit about that last time, and he translated that text. So its philosophy is important to him. He felt it important to translate that. And as I said, many authors, writers, scholars in the Middle Ages were equally influenced by this work. And then the Romance of the Rose. So this is a long French dream vision centered on different aspects of love, and he translated that into Middle English as well. So there's a great diversity in his works in a number of ways. So diversity in terms of the forms and genres. It's spiritually focused, but also focused on this world. So it's spiritually focused in terms of, as I said, this theme of the pilgrimage in Canterbury Tales, but we're not forgetting the sights along the way, so to speak. So if life is a pilgrimage, if life is a road or a highway, that's an old 80s song that no one will get the reference to except myself. But if life is a highway, we're not solely focused on the goal. We are, that's definitely focused on the goal, but we are going to stop and see some of the sights along the way. So too in Chaucer's poetry, there is this overarching concern with the spiritual end or the spiritual goal of our existence, but we're not going to gloss over the human frailties of our existence, what's laughable about our existence, the limits and the hypocrisies and the failings and the sinfulness and the lust and the gluttony and the greed that we see in human life. There are also an intellectual side to Chaucer, filled with references. Even if you saw from the Canterbury Tales references to Aristotle, Plato, other classical authors, but also rooted references to the lower passions, mix of seriousness and playfulness. So quite a diversity in the works. And now it's again on Chaucer's language, a product of Anglo-Saxon and Norman French. Okay, so Anglo-Saxon, the Germanic roots of English, mixed with a particular dialect of French. You kind of mix that together, and that's what produces Middle and then ultimately modern English. The Norman French, like all Romance languages, are a dialect of Latin. And part of that mixing of the Anglo-Saxon language and the Norman French language occurred because of intermarriage of Anglo-Saxon, as I indicate here, Anglo-Saxon war widows. So the series of battles, got Anglo-Saxon women left widows, and these Norman conquerors who are men trying to settle down with land they've newly conquered, marrying these Anglo-Saxon women. Their children would be speaking a mix of the two. Now, so in modern English, our vocabulary, so to speak, is still predominantly of an Anglo-Saxon root. Okay, so this is a list of the 100 most frequently used words in English, and they all have an Anglo-Saxon root. But there, as you go down kind of that list of frequency, and you let's say, examine the vocabulary in different, more formal settings than everyday language, you see a higher frequency of words that have a French root to them. So I have an example there. I can say I ask about something, so it has an Anglo-Saxon root. But if I'm in court, and this is where the distinction started to happen, in court, in Anglo-Norman courts, you'd have the language of discussion would be dominated by this Norman French, and that permeates the culture. So to sound important, I would kind of switch into these Norman French usage. And in my everyday language, perhaps at home, maybe I'm using more of the Anglo-Saxon language. So I can ask about something or I can inquire. So the latter has that Norman French root. So as a result, and this is one estimate, okay, so by the Stephen Frank character in his work, The Pen Commandments. So as a result, English, because it's basically doubling up or tripling up in some cases vocabulary from different sources, has a greater linguistic possibility, let's say, has a greater universe of words from which to choose, than other comparable European languages. So the actual Canterbury Tales, this image, by the way, is, I'll just stop here. I don't often stop to talk about the images too much, but they're all there for a reason. This one is called the Wilton Diptych. So Diptych is a particularly interesting form of medieval art, often created on panels that can fold. Okay, so you have a diptych, sometimes a triptych. So there's 3 panels. Okay, so but the diptych is a very popular form in the Middle Ages. So these wooden panels painted with facing images that can fold. The diptych, as a form, the diptych as a form suits quite well the medieval dualistic point of departure. So you have on one side of the diptych generally a reference to the physical world or to temporal existence, to this world. And then on the other side of the diptych, you have a reference to the eternal, to a heavenly realm. So to here on the left, we have a depiction of an idealized depiction of this world, of King Richard II kneeling on the left, and with other religious figures in the background, but human figures in the background. And you have on the right Mary, the baby Jesus, an angelic host. So we have on the left kind of God manifested in the physical world, so through the rule of a king, and we have that translated to its spiritual significance as Christ, etc., on the right. So the diptych is in visual art kind of what happens in the allegories and symbols that we see in medieval literature. Okay, so we're going to see even in the depictions of the characters, we see symbols that need to be translated to their let's say spiritual or meaning. So a physical description needs to be translated to its spiritual meaning. So the structure of the Canterbury Tales, the frame narrative, so to start off with, describes a group of travelers on a religious pilgrimage. So we have 30 pilgrims. There are 29 plus the narrator plus the host. Okay, so 30 pilgrims plus a host. Each of the pilgrims, according to the agreement that is settled upon at the end of the General Prologue, each of the pilgrims is to tell 2 tales on the way to Canterbury and 2 tales on the way back. So the ultimate plan was to have 120 tales. Chaucer only completed 23, and the pilgrims don't make it to Canterbury. So the host, Harry Bailey, will judge the tales, and the winner will earn a free dinner back at the inn when they return. So the framing technique means that there's an interplay between the teller of the tale, the character, and the tale that is told. So the tales that are told often there's references between the different tales to other tales, but there's also within the tales often little jibes or insults to other characters and tensions that have occurred between the characters. So the framing aspects of it, so there's these 23 tales, as I mentioned. We haven't read any of the tales. We've only read this prologue, which is part of the frame. So there are the 23 tales. The frame consists of the general prologue at the beginning. There are prologues to each tale. So a character will come in and say, you know, I think it's really important to talk about X, which is why I'm going to tell this tale about X, about Y. And in those interchanges, so the host will have an interchange with the character. We learn little snippets again about the character, much as we learn some about them in the general prologue. Then at the end, there's Chaucer's retraction. So Chaucer basically at the end of the work kind of apologizes for having written literature in general as basically a diversion, as potentially a waste of time, or at worst morally questionable. And there's quite a bit of scholarship about what to make of the retraction, of course. So the objective is to tell tales of best sentence and most Solas. So the tales have sentence, it means best moral instruction, okay? And then most Solas is the most, let's say, entertainment or most delight, so to speak. Builds on the classical imperative that literature should be profitable and delightful, should profit and delight, according to Horace, ancient Roman philosopher and critic. Now, the frame narrative is based on Boccaccio's Decameron. On Tuesday, we talked about the author's introduction to the Decameron, but not much else about it. We talked about the description of the plague. Okay, so too there you have a frame narrative. So the frame is the author describing the situation in Florence. He describes 7 characters meeting there, deciding to leave Florence because of the plague, and go to this country villa just outside of Florence. Very idyllic setting. They're out in the countryside, fresh air, in the gardens of this villa. Every day they vow to tell one story a piece per day, and then those are the stories proper. And the frame again are the descriptions of the characters, the author's introduction. And Boccaccio has a very similar sort of retraction at the end to the Chaucer's retraction that I described earlier. So definitely Chaucer was aware of this work that came out a few decades before his, definitely borrowing from it. So what's notable are the elements that are slightly different. So Chaucer made changes to this design, and obviously had reasons for doing so, and felt it was important. So the differences are this notion of the journey to a spiritual goal, as opposed to this kind of self-centered, so to speak, retreat from the city in order to go to some idyllic setting. Okay, so in Chaucer, the journey is for a spiritual goal. They never quite get there. So that says something as well. Whereas in Boccaccio, they get there immediately. They tell their tales in that setting. The other major difference I would point to is that the characters are all noble characters in Boccaccio. Okay, Chaucer's pilgrims are the whole spectrum of society, from noble person to the clergy to the most kind of base laborers, to use the language of Chaucer, laborers whose language is not as refined as these noble characters, that he even has to apologize for their language. Here's a depiction of the route that they take on their journey. they depart from the top left from Southwark, which is a suburb of London at the time. They depart from the Tabard Inn there. The goal is the shrine of Thomas à Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. So it's about 60 miles there. So it's 4 days each way at walking pace approximately. So this Thomas character was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was assassinated in 1170. This probably by agents of Henry II, the ruler at the time. So Thomas à Becket and Henry II had been friends, they drinking buddies, so to speak. But then Thomas kind of found religion and said and started to put pressure on the state to be more spiritual in its undertakings, etc. He started to put pressure on Henry II instead of just going along with some of his plans. And then Henry II is reported to have said at some event something like, "Will no one rid me of this lower class priest," or something like this lowborn priest. And then shortly after that, several men entered there and assassinated Thomas à Becket. He becomes this, he's canonized a few years later, and miracles start to happen in the cathedral where his relics and remains are kept. So he becomes canonized as a saint, but also seen as this martyr figure and with healing powers. It led immediately to increased cultural power for the church. So there's kind of more, let's say, trust or social capital generated for the church and at the expense of the monarchy, because of this general consensus that this had been the doing of Henry II. But also this kind of this trust means that members of the church for a couple of centuries after that can take other liberties or feel like they can get away with cutting corners here, maybe getting more bribes here. So there's some correlation between the increases in the levels of corruption in different levels of the church and the trust in which society had put into these offices. So now the general prologue. So the general prologue begins with the famous lines, "When that April with his showers suita." So when April with its sweet smelling showers. So in beginning with this praise of spring, praise of what happens in April, it's following this old, maybe one of the oldest literary genres, probably going back thousands of years before we have recorded physical texts, is a genre that celebrates spring, rebirth, the cycle of vegetation. That can also be spiritual rebirth, but on the literal level is about the rebirth of plants after a long winter. Okay, but as I said, that rebirth is also about the possibilities of humans remaking themselves, finding themselves in a new way, directed to a true goal. So the genre in its immediate in its immediate poetic context is called Reverdie. It's an old French poetic genre, but has roots, as I said, probably for thousands of years in vegetation cycles and vegetation myths and rituals. So rituals that would celebrate the return of crops, the return of vegetations after a long winter where one's survival is even at stake. Okay. So let's read the first 18 lines or so. So when and I'll read the modern English so that I don't have to paraphrase. When April with its sweet-smelling flowers has pierced the drought of March to the root and bathed every vein of the plants in such liquid by which power the flower is created, when the west wind also with its sweet breath in every wood and field has breathed life into the tender new leaves, and the young sun has half its course in Aries, has run half its course in Aries, and small fowls make melody, those that sleep all the night with open eyes, so nature incites them in their hearts. So when spring happens, so line one, when April does this, and then line 5, when the west wind also with its sweet breath. So we haven't found out what happens yet, but we're finding these descriptions of, so April brings showers, when this happens, when the west wind comes with its breath and the new leaves are budding, and small fowls are making melody and stay up all night. They stay up all night with open eyes. Why? Because they're, according to this, they're probably having sex or something. There's sexual innuendo there that spring brings back not only the life of these plants, but these frisky birds are up all night because they're being pricked in this direction by nature. Then, it's line 12. We get the punchline. When all this happens, when, then folk long to go on pilgrimages. So it's almost it's a reversal of expectation, because the first 11 lines you're talking about, it's when the spring happens and the birds are frisky and life is coming back, and the reference could be to something more physical. The reference could be to something more, whether lustful or purely some sort of form of physical delight. Here, it's switched to a spiritual plane that may have, let's say, defy the reader's expectations. Then folk long to go on pilgrimages, and professional pilgrims to seek foreign shores to distant shrines known in various lands, and specially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they travel, to seek the holy blessed martyr that helped them when they were sick. So the blessed martyr is that Saint Thomas of Becket that we talked about. Okay. So this is this celebration of spring that brings a rebirth, but also a spiritual rebirth, as we discover in line 12. Now, I just want to highlight as well how important this opening is, or how people respond to this opening throughout the tradition. So we have, for instance, if you take the sister course, 2106, so British literature from 1700 to the present, you'll probably come across a giant of early 20th century literature, T.S. Eliot. So he's writing, and again, I point this out to highlight the fact that the tradition of a literary tradition is this sort of dialogue. There's a set of literary genres, literary expectations that are created in the past. They're built upon throughout or over time. And new authors come along and they, in a way, if they're rooted in the tradition, need to dialogue with it and see that tradition in a new way, or see the conventions of the tradition in a new way. And T.S. Eliot's a great example of that. So he's writing at the beginning of the 20th century. So this time of kind of a time of nihilism. The religious foundations have been lost. Epic and other traditional forms of literary expression don't seem viable anymore. So he wants to go back and make explicit references to the tradition, and as they say later in the poem, shore these fragments together. Can we take the fragments of the tradition and try to piece it back into a whole? And so he has, in his famous poem, The Wasteland, written in 1922, this opening. So think about when that April with his Chaucer. So when April with its sweet showers. Here, it's kind of a reversal of that expectation. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the deadland, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. So there, obviously, rather than we have basically the opposite of the Reverdie, celebrating spring. We have instead let us say, denial of the rebirth that spring represents, the denial of the possibility of renewal, the denial, or at least the questioning of the worth of even trying. Like, why not just keep ourselves kind of deadened in a forgetful snow and not try to embrace existence or try to renew ourselves. So more of that if you are to take the sister course, potentially. So I said that we need to think about the Canterbury Tales as an estate satire. First, I'll just point out that the historical context is that England, as with other countries in Europe, are moving gradually from a rigid estate system to due to different socioeconomic pressures, but primarily a growing middle class is kind of bursting the expectations or putting pressure on the existing expectations of what individuals are supposed to be doing. In the ideal model, we see kind of the different estates and their expectations on the right. So the first estate, the clergy, they're supposed to provide instruction and moral authority to the other two estates. And the second estate is to rule and provide privileges, etc., to the clergy. And the third estate is to provide the material support. They labor, provide the food, and the provisions, the material needs of the other two estates. So if one provides political rule, political direction, one provides spiritual direction and spiritual rule, the other provides the material conditions necessary to exist in the first place. So each has their role. We see some of the occupations and classes that the Franklin, the merchant, for instance, in the General Prologue, that don't easily fit these estates. Okay. Also, this is the ideal picture, what people are supposed to do. But people with their sinfulness and their individual passions, their selfishness. People are driven by these selfish motives. This is what Chaucer's satire points out, that the clergy are not necessarily there just about providing moral or spiritual instruction. They're there to line their own pockets in a lot of cases. So the clergy that we see there in a lot of the cases are basically scum who are driven by greed, are examples of hypocrisy, are the pardoner, for instance, sells relics and sells pardons indiscriminately for cash and his own advancement. And there are many other examples of this. So the work, Chaucer ultimately draws us to question the proper bonds of community. So there's this ideal, but what in reality is that are the bonds that bring the community together? What would be the proper ordering of the community? So there is a certain political dimension to this, or let's say political philosophical dimension to Chaucer's work. Part of the criticism of ecclesiastical excess puts Chaucer in the tradition of the Lollards in England, who were flourishing just around before this time. So it's an anti-clerical movement pushing for reform of Western Christianity to be very, very similar to the Lutheran and Protestant reforms almost 2 centuries later, but a kind of proto-Reformation, seeing let's say the corruption of these offices, seeing that they used the obfuscation of Latin, the fact that they had the biblical text to themselves in Latin, and they became this kind of wall between that to the common people. They called for vernacular translation of the scripture so that these corrupt mediating figures would not be the only ones in the way. And as I mentioned, so the monk, the pardoner, the friar, the summoner, all of them examples of these corrupt figures of the clergy in Canterbury Tales. So the narrator, so there's also a character named Geoffrey Chaucer, but we should distinguish between Chaucer, the author, and this character, the narrator. So one point, let's say, to distinguish them is the narrator is naive. Okay, so the narrator seems to accept the ideal presentations of the characters. So if a character comes off because of their dress, because of their behavior, because of what they say, as this ideal embodiment of the clergy or of the nobility, Chaucer, the narrator, seems to say, well, that was a very perfect, gentle knight. So that's a very perfect, noble knight. But as we'll see, the knight, for example, the first character described, we'll look at that a bit more closely, is not necessarily totally a perfect, noble knight. There are questionable actions there. There are questionable, it's an example perhaps of the type of limits posed by that estate system that individual greed and the failings of individual can call into question. Whereas the author, it would seem that the intention of Chaucer, the author, is to cut through that and point out to us as careful readers the hypocrisy of some of these characters, and thus to satirize the estate satire portion of the work, to satirize the depictions of these various social classes or functions, these estates. The characters are types, so the descriptions don't give us much about their inner thoughts or feelings. We don't, except for a few occasions, we don't get their names, their individual identities. We only get their social class or function. Okay, so we get nun, plowman, doctor, monk. We don't get, Robert or whatever, except for, as I said, I think there's 4 characters whose names we know. So we need to pay attention to their description of their dress, their possessions, their behaviors, and we can see often in those descriptions indications from the physical to, let's say, spiritual failings in the characters and maybe in the social, in society itself. So let's start with the knight. We'll start with the knight, and then we'll turn to the text and read this description of the knight as well as of the squire to flesh this out. But basically, we want to take into account that the general prologue starts with describing in the first section of characters noble characters or gentlefolk. Okay, so the knight, the prioress, who would have been a noble lady who went in to take devoted herself to God and live a cloistered life as a nun, and then becomes the prioress, so the head of the convent. When you read the description of the prioress, we see that she's not necessarily the sort of cloistered, perfect nun that we would expect from that ideal estate system. So the description of the characters begin with these noble characters. Then we kind of descend to the lower. We go through kind of some middle class characters, and then we go through to laborers such as the miller, the cook, and what have you. The knight is a good example of the ambiguous portrayal of the characters in Chaucer. Okay, so there's a great deal of ambiguity, and there's a great deal of scholarly difference of opinion about how we're to take some of these characters. So I'll give you some of that when we look at the knight. The knight is often described as an ideal type, as this is kind of the ideal of the knight that at Chaucer's time one would want all knights to be, so to speak. But I would say if we see only that aspect of the knight, I think we're being overly swayed by the naive narrator, who refers to the knight 5 times as worthy, a very parfait, gentle knichte. However, there's several signs that he has, as I say here, blood on his hands. That he probably doesn't manifest the chivalric ideal that he should. So his battles, the description of the battles, happen in a few main areas. They happen in Eastern Europe. So this in Eastern Europe, so Lithuania, Russia. There's some of the battles are in Spain, Northern Africa, against probably various Islamic forces, as well as Islamic forces in the Middle East and Egypt, so Alexandria. So I have a question here, a logistical question. There doesn't seem to be a topic in the Chaucer section of the on Brightspace to post a thread where we post our discussion. Where do we post our discussion post for Chaucer? So yeah, if you can't get it on the, if there isn't a separate Chaucer thread, so that's a good question. The question is, if there isn't a separate Chaucer thread. I thought I put one there, and I thought you could reply to the Chaucer thread there. If not, you can put it in the Middle English section there. I'll find it. So put it on any of the threads there. That's fine. Okay, thank you. So that was a question from Serban. Hopefully I've got that right. So the three main areas of the battles: Eastern Europe, Spain, North Africa, Middle East, a mix of foes. Islam, so ostensibly could be fighting for Christianity, probably as a mercenary though, probably not fighting out of an allegiance to his king or immediate lord. Same with definitely in Eastern Europe. There's no evidence that there would have been some sort of crusade in Eastern Europe at that time. He may have been fighting other Christians there. He may have been fighting others who are not Christian, but probably again for money, not for some sort of kind of noble duty to a lord, and not necessarily for the faith. Okay, nor does none of the battles. I mentioned that Chaucer himself was taken prisoner in France. The big enemy at the time was France. So none of these battles where, let's say, he might have had a duty to the king to fight in one of these battles, none of them are there because maybe he's off doing these other ones for pay, so to speak. He's also in a rusty shirt. It says it's stained, maybe rust, maybe blood, in a hurry, perhaps, as I say here, to get on this pilgrimage and atone for his sins. Like he hasn't even had a chance to go home he hasn't even had a chance to go home and kind of wash up, so to speak. So I'm going to pull up the text and we'll look at the text itself here. Okay, so starting at line 35. But nonetheless, while I have time and opportunity, before I proceed further in this tale, it seems to me in accord with reason. I want to point out, first of all, remember we talked about the unity of, or the medieval synthesis of reason and revelation. So here, it's in accord with reason, kind of in passing a slight an indication of the importance of reason, but not, it's not the only thing that's important, but it stands there as a pillar upon which our actions can be guided, as long as we're also guided by, let's say, faith and a deference to the divine, so to speak. So the Middle Ages had that. We're able to take both in stride. Whereas for us, it's a battle, right? Like for us, we have, just to kind of circle back on that point. For us, in our age, we have the representing reason. We have the new atheists who call anyone who believes in let's say divine revelation, who believes that there is a God, etc. So we have, what's his name, Richard Dawkins. We had, before he passed away, Christopher Hitchens. We have Lawrence Krauss, a physicist. So we have these authors who are often lumped together as the new atheists. So they think that their position is, so Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist, Krauss a physicist, Christopher Hitchens a journalist, but general intellect. science can provide all the answers, and the rational or say analysis of the data and evidence provided by science can be our guiding thread to our human actions, our human goals. That existence, the cosmos as such, has no call for a creator God or anything beyond what science itself can define. And then, so on the other hand, you have those who try to carve out a space for religion and say science doesn't have all the answers, so to speak. So it becomes a battle for us, the claims of reason versus the claims of revelation, or the claims of the divine, or a battle, and they seem to be mutually exclusive. So the Middle Ages during this time, lived in this synthesis where both had a place at the table, so to speak, and didn't necessarily impugn the other. The other, like the theological claim doesn't necessarily say that reason is unfounded. No, reason is it needs to be followed in the way we figure out how to undertake our daily affairs, how we should study the motion of the stars in order to better plan our crops, what have you. And then on the other side, of course, reason knew its limits, so to speak. Reason knew that the claim of reason knew that there are limits to what the human intellect can fathom, so to speak, and that beyond that it's a mystery, and that we have to kind of defer to something else. So that type of synthesis, I would say, was broken with kind of in different ways with modernity, and part of the severing of that synthesis meant that literature itself declines, because literature seems to have thrived when it can point to the poetic can point to a divine meaning behind existence. If existence is a bunch of atoms that are rationally explained, the poetic impulse seems to be left bereft of direction. So we have poets like T.S. Eliot who say, okay, well, we don't have these great genres anymore. We don't have kind of this guiding thread. How can we make poetry now that isn't just kind of a description of how I feel at this particular time, and isn't that great, but it's no better or worse than this person's particular impressions of how they felt as a out of work father or whatever. So a small digression on the synthesis, but an important one, on the synthesis of reason and revelation that we see in the Middle Ages, but also in terms of how it can support a particular poetic worldview, a poetic expression of seeing divine meaning within our physical existence. Okay, so he says, it seems in accord with reason to tell you all the circumstances of each of them as it seemed to me, and who they were, and of what social rank, and also what clothing they were in, and at a night then will I first begin. So it makes, again, according to reason and according to proper order of social standing, it makes sense for him to start with the night. The actual tales don't follow the kind of order that is described here in the prologue. So the actual tales start with the Knight's Tale, but then quickly jump around. There's no order to the tellers. There is, to some extent, an ordering of the topics, because the topics seem to refer to one another a bit, but you have to do a bit of detective work to find that. A knight there was, and that one was a worthy man. So he's referred to as worthy, I think I said 5 times, right? Who from the time that he first began to ride out, he loved chivalry, fidelity and good reputation, generosity and courtesy. He was very worthy in his lord's war, and for that he had ridden no man farther. as well in Christendom as in heathen lands, and was forever honored for his worthiness. He was at Alexandria when it was won, so it was won by the other side, by the way. He was at the siege of Alexandria when it was lost. He had sat very many times in the place of honor above knights of all nations in Prussia. He had campaigned in Lithuania and in Russia. No Christian man of his rank so often. Also, he had been in Granada at the siege of Algeciras and had ridden in Morocco. He was at Ayash and at Talia when they were won. And in the Mediterranean, he had been at many a noble expedition. He had been at 15 mortal battles and fought for our faith at Tlemcen, 3 times in formal duels, and each time slain his foe. This same worthy knight had also been at one time with the Lord of Balat against another heathen in Turkey. And evermore he had an outstanding reputation, and although he was brave, he was prudent, and of his deportment as meek as is a maid. He never yet said any rude word in all his life unto any sort of person. He was a truly perfect noble knight. But to tell you of his clothing, his horses were good, but he was not gaily dressed. He wore a tunic of coarse cloth, all stained with rust by his coat of mail, and that's again besmottered with his habergeon. So it's not necessarily just with rust; it's all stained with by his coat of mail. But that could be rust, but it could also be blood, right? Or other mud. It could be anything. For he was recently come back from his expedition and went to do his pilgrimage. So he just gets back and it's, I've got to go on a pilgrimage. So there are some, as I said, who would assert that there seems to be blood on the knight's hands, that he's not this perfect, gentle knight that the narrator thinks him to be. Let's compare that to the squire. So with him there was his son, a young squire, a lover and a lively bachelor, with locks curled as if they had been laid in a curler. He was 20 years of age, I guess. Of his stature, he was of moderate height and wonderfully agile and of great strength. And he had been for a time on a cavalry expedition in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and conducted himself well for so little space of time, in hope to stand in his lady's good graces. So even though he's in little space of time, even though he's much younger than the knight, his father, his list of battles include, let's say, noble destinations in France, fighting for the causes to which he would owe a certain duty to king and lord. So in the description of the squire, we get kind of a highlight of what's lacking in the description of the knight in a way. Like, so, oh yeah, well, didn't the knight go there? He was embroidered as if it were a mead or a meadow, all full of fresh flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. His gown was short, with long and wide sleeves. So he had very short gowns or kind of skirt there, and probably showing off those young, strong legs of his. So, and remember, he's a lover and lusty and what have you. So the first impression of the squire can be of this kind of carefree, focused on kind of young living and lustfulness of a 20-year-old. But we have these other indications of his deference to duty, his directiveness to the proper station, so to speak. So in some ways, we have the reverse of the knight. So the knight is presented, at first glance as the perfect knight, but when you dig a little deeper, you see he's not exactly the ideal representation of that estate. With the squire, we see at first glance maybe someone who's frivolous, is going to be distracted by his own lustful desires. But as you dig a little deeper, actually, perhaps a more noble representation of the knightly estate. He knew how to make songs and well compose, joust, and also dance and well draw and write. He loved so passionately that at nighttime he slept no more than does a nightingale. So he's definitely, again, another lustful. He doesn't sleep at night, just like the birds at the beginning. Courteous he was, humble and willing to serve, and carved before his father at the table. So his role, part of his role, is to do what his knight that he's serving guides him to do, and one of those duties is to dutifully carve at the table for the knight, and he does. He participates in the battles that he's called upon to participate in. Let's do one more. I'll skip the yeoman. So the next is the yeoman. Let's go to the prioress. Okay. There was also a nun, a prioress. So prioress, the head of the convent. Okay, so a nun, someone who's supposedly living a cloistered life. That's the thing you can see with these. The other thing with these characters is you see these characters going on pilgrimages, and they're supposed to be in their cloister. They're supposed to be, the monk and supposed to be in the monastery. Here, the nun in the nunnery, they're supposed to be cloistered away from the secular world. Yet in both cases, we see them out. They're going on this pilgrimage. They're quite attached to the outside world. They don't seem to see the fact that they've devoted themselves just to God and thus devoted themselves, made a commitment to cloister themselves from the secular world. They don't see that as an impediment to just living a worldly life. Who was very simple and modest in her smiling. Her greatest oath was but to St. Lois, and she was called Madame Eglantine, or Wild Rose. So she's one of the few characters we know their name. She sang the divine service very well, intoned in her nose in a very polite manner, and she spoke French very well and elegantly, in the manner of St. Stratford at the bow. For French of Paris was to her unknown, so the Stratford would be place to learn French, but obviously there's the quality of the French is not up to snuff, so to speak. Kind of like my government French, I would have to say. Maybe it's similar to that. At meals, she was well taught indeed. She let no morsel fall from her lips, nor wet her fingers deep in her sauce. She well knew how to carry a morsel to her mouth and take good care that no drop fell upon her breast. So I'll have to remind myself to read this particular passage to my 10-year-old, who I cannot convince, my 10-year-old boy. Every time we have a meal, we have to repeatedly say, please, lean over your plate, think about what you're doing, because it's all over the place. It's just it's not a battle we're winning. So of course, the prioress is very concerned with courtly manners and table manners. So again, these are secular concerns. This is the concerns of the world. She's concerned with how to okay, if she's in today's parlance, if she was to go to a very expensive restaurant, she would know exactly what to do with all of the proper utensils, etc. That would not be a barrier to her entry into that elite lifestyle at all. She well knew how to carry a morsel to her mouth and take good care that no drop fell upon her breast. Her greatest pleasure was in good manners. She wiped her upper lip so clean that in her cup there was seen no tidy bit of grease when she had drunk her drink. She reached for her food in a very seemly manner, and surely she was of excellent deportment, and very pleasant and amiable in demeanor, and she took pains to imitate the manners of court and be dignified in behavior, also, and to be considered worthy of reverence. But to speak of her moral sense, I find that an interesting turn here. We don't get much explicitly from the narrator about the moral sense, but we do almost against the narrator, because the narrator just thinks that she's a perfect prioress, again, a perfect embodiment of that clergy estate. We obviously see chinks in that armor that the narrator doesn't see. And even by saying, but to turn to her moral sense, as opposed to just her mere manners, we realize that the but is important. You know, this is not going to be the same. If she may seem to follow good manners, she may seem to be perfect on the outside, but there are questions we may ask ourselves. She was so charitable and so compassionate, she would weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bled. She had some small hounds that she fed with roasted meat or milk and fine white bread. So, so she has, so her moral sense, the depiction of her moral sense is about her charity and compassion. Okay, so she's very compassionate, but the compassion seems to be directed at, she would weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap. And she was compassionate to her small hounds. So she's, in her cloistered lifestyle, she's not supposed to have pets, right? She's supposed to be just, you know, devoted to a certain regimen of prayer and labor, etc. The pets are for these different pastimes and what have you, that is a life of pleasure, that represents a life of leisure and pleasure. The compassion seems to be directed to these animals whom she feeds better than probably 99% of the population, you know, roasted meat, milk, fine white bread. The common pilgrims here will not have been eating these, okay? So it's kind of akin to sometimes you hear of some people, you know, God bless them, that maybe have enough money to spend tens of thousands of dollars on their cat's surgery for their paw or something like that, whereas others you know, are maybe waiting for 2 years for an MRI, other poor human individuals, so to speak. So we have a similar parallel here. Compassion directed to her pets and hypothetically to a mouse, but is that compassion, is that charity directed to other humans? It's not as clear. Sorely she wept if one of them were dead, or if someone smote it smartly with a stick, and all was feeling and tender heart. Her wimple was pleated, so she has a fancy headdress with a veil, which again she's not supposed to have, was pleated in a very seemly manner. Her nose was well formed, her eyes gray as glass. So gray, interesting, the descriptions of color have changed. So her eyes are probably blue, but in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, also in ancient Greece, by the way, gray is what they called what we perceive as blue. So how the naming of a seemingly objective color spectrum has changes with different cultural representations of it. So her nose well formed, her eyes gray as glass, her mouth very small and moreover soft and red, but surely she had a fair forehead. It was almost 9 inches broad, I believe. So the forehead, a high forehead, was seen as very attractive in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Not sure when that died down. I'm not sure. I don't know, but maybe it's still attractive. I don't know. But that's why she wears that fancy headdress, to show off her fair forehead. Again, it's not necessarily nunly behavior. For certainly she was not undergrown. Her cloak was very well made, as I was aware. About her arm she bore of small coral a set of beads. So jewelry, she's well adorned with jewelry. Again, not necessarily what she's supposed to be wearing. adorned with large green beads, and thereon hung a brooch of very bright gold, on which there was first written an A with a crown, and after love conquers all. So amor vincit omnia. So that could be a reference to God as love that conquers all, but within the context, it probably, also has roots in love poetry. So in the context, it's probably more of a physical love that we see the nun, the prioress, embodying here, as opposed to that spiritual love. So I'm going to stop there in terms of and see if there's any questions. Are there any questions about the Canterbury Tales as an estate satire, or any of the context that we discussed? So hopefully that's somewhat more clear in terms of how the Canterbury Tales shows us the kind of the ideal of those three estates in the late Middle Ages, but also shows us how that ideal was becoming increasingly called into question. And Chaucer does it brilliantly in the General Prologue of the Canterbury Tales. The elements of this satire have echoes throughout the tradition. So in satire generally, in a Jonathan Swift, in Lawrence Sterne, Tristram Shandy, in other satirists, we'll see this type of juxtaposition, a naive juxtaposition of the seeming perfect embodiment of a social order, as well as undercut by a deeper introspection of that character. As we saw, that the other kind of resonance of Chaucer throughout the tradition is in this notion of the Reverdie, the appeal to and celebration of spring at the beginning of the General Prologue. Now we see how that sees a kind of reversal in the 20th century with T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. The other, I guess, takeaway would be Chaucer's emphasis on this thematic of life as a pilgrimage. Okay, so very much in accordance with the threads of medieval thinking that we talked about. So the thread of dualism, that there's a physical world, a spiritual world, and one is our true home. This one is just a kind of a detour. Also, the Stoicism and the Stoicism as manifested in the consolation of philosophy, and that this realm is a realm of fortune and change that we can't control. So you shouldn't put too much of your focus, your investment in this world that you can't control. What we see with the problem of the clergy here is that they are invested in this world about gaining wealth, and this is just and they're trusteth in her who turneth as a ball, to go back to the poem Truth that we discussed on Tuesday. They're trusting in the realm of fortune and the goddess Fortuna, as opposed to being ones who instruct us and lead the rest of society to a higher spiritual aim. So we can see all of that working in this theme of life as a pilgrimage, manifested on the literal level in terms of the actual pilgrimage of the characters, but also in the spiritual realm, or the allegorical realm, in terms of how the moral teaching of the work is for us to think of our life as figuratively like a pilgrimage. Okay, so barring any questions, I'll stop there, and I'll just say before you shut off, for Tuesday, we're going to start with Renaissance literature and Sidney's Astrophil and Stella. So be very careful there. So your reading there is what I've linked you there is a PDF, I believe, of the actual poem, but each poem also has a modern prose summary behind underneath it. And if you were to read all of them, there's over, I think 100, and I forget how many, but there's over 100 of these sonnets. That would take a long time, but I've only, look at the syllabus, look at the website, I've only highlighted a few that I'm expecting you to read, okay? So the first one is the actual poem, and then there's a prose summary, so don't get confused about that. And also make sure you know which ones I've asked you to read, okay? Until Tuesday. Thank you very much.